Maybe it's up to you. Sometimes kids can do a better job than their parents when life gets mean. We try, but we got confusions. These words comforted Early. She looked at Velma. Yeah, she said, thanks. You go on back and tell her you love her. That's all a mama needs to hear. Yeah, Early said, realizing Velma probably never got to hear that from her kids. Things could be worse. They were still three. Early walked slowly back up the stairs, splashed her face with cold water, and headed over to the cluster. Sun was up and opening drawers with a jerk, one after the other, moving faster and faster. Hey, where is it? Where's our first book of rhythms? I was going to read a few pages aloud to you two tonight, just to bring us back to happier times, but I don't see it. Early, did you take it to school? Early shook her head. Of course not. And I'm sorry, Some. I didn't mean. Juby! Some shouted, her voice strange and shrill. You didn't do anything with it, did you? Juby's eyes got big, and he whispered, I gave it to a boy. He let me play with his truck. Which boy? Which? Some was crouched in front of Juby now, and her intensity frightened both kids. It's okay, Some. I'll look around, Early said, and began to walk between the bunks, asking for the book. Seen our old family read aloud? My brother gave it to a boy in this room, and we're sorry, but we want it back. Anyone got it? Some rushed around the room after Early, shouting at everyone. Juby couldn't seem to remember which boy he'd given it to. No one offered to give it back. The guard came over and threatened to call Mrs. Happity if some didn't simmer down. Some then turned her back on Juby, who was now wailing. Early had to step in and quiet him down. When he finally fell asleep, she lay awake, feeling angry, but this time not at Some. Her mother was obviously in trouble. How dare someone keep their book, a book Dash had found for their family, when they'd asked for it back? She peeked out the tiny slivers of light coming through the shelter blinds and thought about what it felt like to fly, to escape. Crack. Before going to school the next morning, Early printed big signs and put them all over the shelter. Missing the first book of rhythms means a lot to the Pearl family. Please return it if you have it. We thank you. When she got back to school, she went directly into the office. Mrs. B was there and beamed a cheery hello. Well, you're the girl with the pearl, aren't you? The girl with the pretty name. Early nodded and tried to look pleasant. Her smile felt stiff. I'm wondering if you could give me Mr. Wave's phone number. Early paused, and Mrs. B blinked. Early hurried on. I have something new to tell him. He came here last week to meet me when you were out of the office, and then he even came to our shelter that night and talked with my mom and little brother. She stopped for a breath. Please, she added. Mrs. B's nails, pink this time, strolled across the counter while she looked at the ceiling. Well, if he didn't give it to you himself, I'm sorry, honey. I can't do that. No wiggle room in rules. Oh, Early looked so sad that Mrs. B said, but I could leave something on the counter by mistake. Oh, Early said, yes, maybe I'll stop back in at lunchtime. Wow, Mrs. B. Just a scrap of paper. No idea what's on it, she said cheerfully and winked at Early. That morning the classroom felt less strange. From her desk, Early looked around. Mrs. Chaff smiled at her. Why, you look awake this morning. I'm trying to decide on a project for our first free writing time this month. How about a recent dream you've had? How does that sound, kids? Early scowled, and Mrs. Chaff paused, confused. Or any dreams you remember and would like to share with us, she added. Some of the boys snickered, and there was a creaking of chairs. Mrs. Chaff looked irritated. Look, okay, write about what you like to, but it needs to be appropriate. A wish or a dream. You may have to read it aloud. Early wondered what on earth she could say. She couldn't talk about Dash raising them and teaching her to fly, or Velma, who'd lost her kids or upset her little brother and sad mother, both of whom cried all the time now, or Dash, who was the best and smartest father in the world and was wanted by the police. But she could. She bent over, scribbling madly. As she wrote, her face relaxed and a tiny smile appeared. And what seemed like no time but was really 20 minutes, Mrs. Chaff interrupted with, "Okay, that's all we can do today. Early, would you read yours to us?" Early froze, suddenly remembering the girl with the braids in the lunchroom. Was it safe to read what she'd written? The room was quiet. She shook her head. "Oh, come on!" Mrs. Chaff had her hands on her hips and was pleading in an embarrassing way now. "Well, okay," Early agreed, feeling as though more of a fuss would make things worse. "This is about a house in our old neighborhood, and my family and I had a kind of a dream about it. We used our imaginations." "Very good," Mrs. Chaff said encouragingly, her stomach churning. Early read. "What if you could pick where you lived? What if you could pick a house and make it just like you want it? My family and I used to play that game, especially with the home we walked by in Woodlawn. It always had a cat in the front window and red roses in the yard every summer. There was a swing on the porch and rocking chairs. If I lived in that house, I'd change the curtains from white to lace so lots of light came in. I'd hang a crystal in my bedroom window so that rainbows dance around the walls. I'd make a big sign that said, 'Welcome to the Pearl Home,' right next to the doorbell." Early pause, swallowing. Something about the words Pearl Home sounded so far away, like they came from someone else's story. She went on. "My little brother said he'll drive his trucks on the walk all day and eat cookies on the front steps. My dad would mow the lawn and paint the kitchen a sky blue. He loves to read and wants bookshelves in every room. My mom would sit on the porch, be happy again, and watch everyone go by. And at Christmas, we'd have a tree with 1,000 lights and balls and ornaments, sparkling away in the living room. When you looked in from outside, you think, 'This is my dream home.'" She shuffled her 2 pages together in a neat pile and sat absolutely still. Mrs. Chiff dabbed her nose with a tissue and said, "That is so moving. Just beautiful, Early." From the back of the room, someone mimicked, "Just beautiful," and sniffed loudly. Mrs. Chaff spun around. "Who said that? Jason, I'd like you to read yours now." There was shuffling sound, and then a slow voice began. "I dream about having money so we don't have to worry anymore. So we can get me a stunt bike and get my teenage sister a big TV so her friends will want to come over. So we can hang some things on the windows and walls of our home. It's always so bare and we don't got no decoration. My dad sits on the couch all day and wants a job. My mom comes home from work and yells at him 'cause there's toys everywhere and beer bottles tipped over and dishes in the sink. Money is always in my dreams." Mrs. Shaft said, "Very good. My, home is a big thing, isn't it?" Silence. "Not really," a girl said and giggled. "Kind of boring." That there was tittering. Early suddenly felt a spurt of fury. She turned around in her chair to face the girl who'd spoke and the other kids who were smiling. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Try life without a home and you won't laugh about it. Try not having even one family bedroom or even one parent with a job. Try sleeping with a ton of other strangers in the same room. Try having your dad vanish and having a mom who used to be happy and is now sad or mad all the time. Try waiting in a line to eat every meal and waiting in line to make a phone call. Just try it." Early jumped out of her seat and ran, bumping into 3 or 4 desks on the way. Once out in the hall, she bolted blindly toward the bathroom, locked herself in a stall, and sobbed. What had she done? Now she'd never be able to face anyone in that school again. She dried the tears on her sleeve and sat quietly, trying to figure out what to do next. The bell rang. Soon the bathroom filled up with girls, and to her horror, kids kept rattling the handle in her stall. "Hurry up! I gotta go!" "Who's in there?" Early covered her mouth and said, "I'll be right out," hoping that would disguise her voice. Then she heard, "Ooh, it's the homeless girl, the one who read in class," followed by, "Shh, that's not nice." And then, "Whoever you are, you're not Early any longer. You're gonna be late if you don't get going." And then, "Can't make a home in the toilet, won't work," followed by a wave of laughter. Early flung open the door. "Who said that?" Her voice shook, but she felt strong with anger. No one answered. "Whoever you are, you're the worst person I've ever met. I hope you lose your home and Everyone in your family leaves you behind, and you have to start begging for food. Early slammed her shoulder into the metal door of the stall, making one of the girls stagger backward. Elbowing her way past the others, she stomped on the bunch of sneakers. A chorus of, "Ooh, she heard me," and "Ow, I'm telling," drifted out of the bathroom behind her. She was dying to leave school and get back to the shelter on her own, but knew the guard at the exit would stop her. Glancing toward the door, Early almost missed what she then absorbed. The chair miraculously was empty, not a soul to be seen. Maybe only for seconds, she ran as fast as she could and burst outside into the cold, bright air. Crack. Pulling up the hood on her sweatshirt, Early walked as fast as she could, slipping and sliding on the icy sidewalk. She passed a group of police officers and glanced nervously in their direction, but they had bigger problems. One prodded a person wrapped in 100 jackets, a lump lying against the building. No face was visible, but the head shook no again. Early felt like telling the police to leave the poor soul alone, but she kept going. Another cop bent over a form slumped in the doorway of a boarded up building. No response. He called out to someone sitting in a patrol car at the curb. Early shuddered and hurried on. Even a week ago, she would have been shocked at the thought of someone dying outside in the neighborhood, but not anymore. She knew shelter rules were there were that no kids were allowed in unless their parent was there also. Some, you better be here. Oh, please. She prayed over and over as she hurried down the block. Grabbing the shelter door, she yanked it open and bumped right into Mrs. Happy. "Oh my, Early. You've got everyone so worried. The school just called. What happened?" Early felt her legs wobble beneath her and she plopped down into a carton of plastic forks that had been unloaded by a food supply truck. "I want my mother," she moaned. "Can you get my mother?" Mrs. Happy frowned. "Your mother just took your little brother to the hospital. His cough was so bad." Oh, Early's breath whooshed out in a long, shaky sigh. "Please don't make me go back to the school," she pleaded. Mrs. Happy put her arm around Early and walked her into the office. She sat her down in the corner and shut the glass door. Returning to the front desk, the shelter director made a couple of phone calls. Soon a policeman walked in the door. Early felt her heart drop through the floor and zoom into outer space. Was she being arrested? The policewoman walked toward her as if slow motion, with Mrs. Happy now beside her. Early froze. The door opened and Mrs. Happy said, "Early, this officer is going to take you to the hospital to be with your mother and brother, and I'll walk you upstairs to get a change of clothes. And I'll have 3 of your new toothbrushes, just in case you folks are there for the night." Early nodded, unable to speak. They walked up the stairs. When they got to the pearl cluster, on the floor between the bunks was the first book of rhythms. Early pounced on it and gave it a hug. The paper jacket was a bit more ragged, and the green cover beneath had a new streak of dirt, but it looked as though it was still in one piece. "Thanks," she breathed to Mrs. Happy as they headed downstairs. She tucked the book into a plastic bag with their supplies. "Here, this is clean," Mrs. Happy said, handing Early a long mud brown parka. "I always keep an emergency supply, especially when we get such a cold winter." Early slipped her arms into the jacket. It covered her hands. Co- ugh. "Thanks so much, Mrs. Happy," she said. "I didn't mean to leave my stuff at school." "I know, dear. I'll find it when I go to pick the kids this afternoon." Early rode alone in the back of the patrol car, imagining that this is what it might feel like to be Dash if the police found him before his family did. They sped by the entrance to the school. Early dug down and pretended to tie her sneaker, just in case one of the kids spotted her through a window. Not that she was ever going back there, just in case. Her whole life felt like a bunch of just in case moments now. Eating in the school hallway, just in case someone made her feel bad again. Checking the recycling a bunch of times, just in case there was almost unused paper for Juby. Rushing upstairs as soon as she was back from school, just in case some needed the time before dinner for phone calls. No, Early realized with a surge of frustration that Mrs. B had left Mr. Wave's telephone number for her to find at lunchtime. just in case she truly needed it. She did, but now she'd be labeled as the difficult homeless girl if she went back. And Mrs.